Hey everybody, what is going on? Welcome to the GMI Rocket Show. Today's episode number 49. I'm your host, Roman Zelichenko. I am a former immigration attorney turned entrepreneur. I started a company called Laborless, which automates H-1B visa compliance, and GMI Rocket, which brings you the show and is a digital marketing agency geared towards the immigration and global mobility space. I love having different types of guests on the show. I'm really excited to have today's conversation with our guest, Raj Singh, who is the CEO of a company called WayLit. And so WayLit is effectively an immigration platform geared towards employers and their employees that helps them streamline and automate and sort of digitize their immigration program. We're going to get into how WayLit works and that whole thing. WayLit basically brings some of their own kind of contract or lawyers that they work with, but they're a young company, they're growing, they're pivoting, and they're doing all sorts of really cool things. And so I love having these conversations with founders, immigration tech founders who have exited their companies and who have kind of just entered and everything in between. So I'm really excited for this chat. And without further ado, Raj, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. And I'm super psyched to have our discussion today.
Thanks for having me, Roman, and hello, everyone. Appreciate you guys joining the call.
Awesome. Before we jump in, just for folks who are watching live, please let us know you're watching. Drop a comment. Tell us who you are, where you work, where you're kind of watching from. I love kind of seeing, it's fun to see who's tuning in from where, or what parts of the U.S. or what parts of the world. So let us know in the comments. And, of course, ask questions as we go along. I think one of the other fun things is asking the guests quite literally live questions about their companies, their stories, etc. So Raj, in the introduction, I kind of my feeling here is that you're really kind of still at the early stages, at the kind of the bottom floor of what could be an amazing company, and so I'm curious, and I really love to kind of start at the beginning. I'm curious as to your kind of journey before you got into the immigration space, right? And I know part of it is because you actually came here as an immigrant to the U.S. I think on an H-1B visa, if I'm
F1.
Yeah.
So started
F1.
as student. Yeah, international.
Perfect. Okay. And so where did you come from?
So I grew up on the dusky streets of India, and then one thing led to another, and it just so happened that a friend of mine was going to apply for a master's degree after the bachelor's, and I'm like, all right, well, I'm not doing anything fun anyway, so I'm just going to apply as well. And he never got to the US because he just dropped the idea, and I took my GRE and then applied to schools and got here in 2006 with Missouri S&T. For a program in aerospace because I'm a mechanical engineer at the core, and that's essentially when I first started.
That's awesome. And so where are you from in India? Like where'd you grow up?
So I grew up in a city called Chandigarh. It's one of the most planned cities in India. If you haven't been to India, or if you've been to India, or if you have sort of a mindset of how India would be, this city is absolutely different. It was designed by the famous architect Le Corbusier, and it's a fairly recent city. 50 years ago, it was developed after the independence. So that's where I grew up. It's 400 miles, or rather 400 kilometers north of New Delhi.
Mm-hmm. And so when you say planned city, does that mean like a grid, or does it mean that you have like sort of, I don't know, what does that? I mean, I live in New York City, so we actually are kind of planned too. I mean, New York City, a lot of Manhattan is a grid, but other parts of it were just, developed. There used to be farms, and it's turned into kind of suburbs or pseudo suburbs. So what does that look like for you?
You're absolutely right. It's essentially grids, right? Whole of India, or the larger cities or the older cities, there's no grid system as such, right? So the roads were developed after people started settling down. But on this side, the roads were developed before people started settling down, right? So it's more modern. There are more facilities. There were It was designed. It was essentially designed for people who would work at the government offices. So middle class family was kept in mind as the kernel of who is going to be residing in the city. So the houses were designed, the furniture was designed based on what they felt would a middle class man would want to use when he comes back home. The whiskey glasses were designed, in the Le Corbusier style for this man who would be coming home, right, having a glass of whiskey in the evening. So all those small little things, have been designed. There's a library that was designed, the university was designed, hospitals were designed, and how there were local dispensaries that would actually take care of each block of residents for any medical needs, right, preventative care, etc. So the city's come a long way. It's no longer the city that I grew up in, but essentially it's unlike what you would see in the rest of India, or the older cities of India like Mumbai or New Delhi.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's fascinating. I would love to after this recording. I'd love to get more. I've never actually visited India. I really, really want to. It's so big that I want to spend like a month at least traveling around. So I've never taken the plunge, but I definitely would love to visit this and sort of see the difference between kind of a really old city and a really new planned city.
Absolutely, yeah.
That's super cool. So you studied engineering and you studied mechanical engineering in India, right? That was your sort of undergraduate degree. Did you want to become like, I know, of course, I mean, I came from the Soviet Union, and especially during the Cold War, it was like everyone has to be math majors, engineering, right? That was sort of part of the culture. Obviously, there's a really strong culture in India, from what I see, of many people going to sort of engineering or technical schools, right, to get some sort of a degree, whether they stay in the country or leave. Was that sort of the plan for you, or did you have dreams of, I don't know, owning a business, right, or anything else when you were younger?
My family's always been in businesses. My father is a businessman. My younger brother is a businessman, both in India. I've never actually thought about running a business myself until last few years when I got a hang of it and I started running a company. It never occurred to me that I wanted to do that, but I was always sort of doing things that were more, I'd say, entrepreneurial, even in high school, in college. Right, like going and setting up certain societies, trying to make money off of that, organizing stuff, making money off of that, just seeing how things are going to go. So I think that was the only proclivity that I had in this whole thing. When I was doing engineering, one thing I did realize in the first year was that I was never going to be a good engineer ever. And the reason for that is usually in India, and I don't want to stereotype India because my co-founder is from an absolute amazing Indian engineering university, but I'm not. And the reason for that is I just never thought I'll actually be an engineer in my life. It just so happened that, okay, you got these grades in high school, and this is the path you pick, or your friend is picking up that path, and that's the path you take. Without really realizing. So there was no guidance. My family hasn't been, to an engineering school before. There was no guidance at all. So one thing just led to another, and I got to that, and then I realized, nope, this is not something for me. So when I came here, I actually switched from aerospace to engineering management, right? Because I felt that was something that I wanted to do more, talk to people and manage stuff. In retrospect, I didn't know what I was doing, but it just happened that it was the right thing for me to do, because the next job that I found was because of that, and then things just led in the direction that I wanted to go.
That's so let's talk about that. So you came in on an F1 visa. You studied. You got in for aerospace engineering, but so obviously your grades were good enough. I mean, clearly you weren't. Maybe you didn't think you were the best engineer, but clearly, there were universities out there who wanted you, right, as a student. But you, of course, said, okay, this is what I want to do. I want to go more into the management side.
Right.
So can you talk a little bit about your first job and sort of, I love to kind of a little bit talk about how these experiences shaped you, because you did eventually launch your first company, Connexio, which we'll get to, which sort of it had a little bit more to do with the sort of international student side of things before you got into what WayLit is today. What were some of those first few jobs that you got outside of school?
Right. So 2008, I graduated with a master's degree from Missouri S&T, and then I started my CPT. I'm guessing that the audience of this video would know what a CPT is, right? But so I started as an international student. I started working for Monsanto, which is Bayer at this point, which is the biggest employer in one of the biggest employers in St. Louis. Started there on SAP, doing SAP configuration and everything else, and hated it. Absolutely hated it. But then being an international student, you don't really have much leeway, as in, what you can do and who's going to basically sponsor you. So the idea then was, all right, let's try and get a job, see where that's going to take me. And that essentially led me to getting my first job right as I graduated with Monsanto, again, with a different team, and still doing SAP configurations. Did that for about 2 years. And then I think there was the recession that hit, and Monsanto laid off a bunch of people. And lo and behold, because I wasn't doing anything with SAP, so I was one of the people who got the pink slip. And I decided this wasn't working out for me. This just wasn't something that I was enjoying. And I thought, all right, well, I've come from India. Let me actually go back and try things out, which I did. So right as I left Bayer or Monsanto, I went back to India and started helping my father out with the business. And that wasn't still working out for me. It just wasn't working out. So a friend of mine who was having, school friend, who was having really hard time going through building up his company because he had lost a bunch of employees because of management-employee relationships. He's like, dude, you're not doing anything else, just helping your father out. Would you want to come in and tell me how can we do things better? And I did, and one thing led to another. And before I knew it, in the next 2 months, I was literally helping him run the company at that point, day-to-day operations, helping with sales, marketing, and we were running a development studio, which is essentially a dev shop, right? Where you could outsource websites and other stuff. But I did get a hang of it, and I loved what I was trying to do, just building teams and going forward with sales plots and how to build the business further. And that gave me a good handle of what do I need to learn next to do better things.
And this was so. I have two questions about that. First of all, when you returned to India and you were helping your father, what kind of business? Like, what were you doing? What was the business, and sort of what were you doing there?
So my father's got a logistics business, so warehouse and logistics. Right, he runs that for FMCG companies, fast moving consumer goods. So he's got a warehouse where they basically dump a bunch of stuff, and then he distributes that out into the state. So he's got big trucks and trailers that he essentially runs. It was interesting. It was okay, but it wasn't something that I wanted to do. I think I was more interested in working in an office where things could happen virtually rather than just sitting there and figuring out when the next trailer's got to go out.
Right. And the friend's business, the dev shop, that was also in India. So you were still there, and he was like, come help me build this out and lead the teams and all that. Okay.
Right. So so that was still in Chandigarh, and this whole 3 years that I spent there were in Chandigarh, and we essentially raised the business again, and brought in the whole team, made the development practices better, made the management better, and build the team up again. From 50 people, it went up to 100 people again. We added mobile development and all those things, game development. So a lot happened in those 3 years, and I was still exploring, this is still how I wanted to move forward, and if this is something that I wanted to do. But the only thing that was still in my head was my girlfriend at that time, who I met in undergrad in India. She was still in the United States doing her PhD, and during those 3 years, I realized that the cultural difference was so large between where I had started my career in the United States versus how culturally people work in India. And I'm not saying it's wrong or right. It's just something that it wasn't a fit for me. Uh, so I decided, okay, well, I'm going to head back to the United States this time. So after 3 years, I took my GMAT and came here for my MBA at the
Wow.
University of California, Irvine.
Wow. So I want to pause there for a moment.
Yes.
I just want to say, I want to give a shout out here. So Geeta from New Jersey. Hi, Geeta. As always, thank you for watching. We have Tony Shu here.
Tony.
Tony, awesome. Also came here on an F1 and worked in OPT, CPT, and started an awesome company. So very much a kindred spirit.
Yeah.
Marianne says from the state, also from New Jersey, originally from PA. So hi, Marianne. Thank you for watching. And Marco, thank you as always for watching and supporting the show from Miami. Hope you're staying cool down there. And hi, Tony. Okay, so and of course for everybody, please keep questions coming, and anything anything that comes to mind, please share. And of course, any additional comments, always welcome. I love having this sort of live discussion. It's super fun. So at this point, you decide you want to go back to school, to the US. I want to pause for a moment, because just to kind of highlight the fact that so many people like you come to the US, right, for school, right, on an F1 visa. So you came here for a master's in engineering. And I know you went back to India and you worked for some time, but many people here, let's say they work on OPT and they go for their H-1B visa and they don't get it, right? They don't get in the lottery, and their OPT runs out. Maybe their STEM extension runs out, and they want to stay. Maybe they have a spouse or a long-term relationship. Maybe they just love it here. They've made friends. They've established their life. And it's just crazy for me to think about how many folks go through this and then have to effectively go back to school as the only way to stay. And that is not cheap. And it is also, it's time that you spend, not working, right? Not sort of, you're furthering yourself because you're going to school, but you're not working, you're not hands-on. So I just think it's, kudos to you really, right? For basically coming in and investing in the US education system effectively, as your way to stay here. Right.
Well, there's a catch there, right? So I came to the U.S. For aerospace. I had scholarship, right? When I moved to engineering management, I had scholarship, so I did not pay anything for my master's degree.
Touche.
Right. So yes, but I do want to say that U.S. has been absolutely wonderful for both myself and my fiance, or my girlfriend at that point who's my wife now. We've been extremely lucky. We've seen friends who've not been lucky, who were better deserving than I ever was, who were working hard, but because they were unlucky, they just could not get their visa, and they had to go back. Mm-hmm. And I know Tony has a similar story to tell as well. But thankfully, I've just been lucky. One thing after the other just worked out in a way that, we were able to get our green cards at a point. So yeah, I am thankful to the system, how it's worked out, and I'm thankful to for whatever's happened in the last few years, because that wasn't planned at all. It just happened, and one thing just led to another, and it just all fit in well, and we were here.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the kind of the MBA and sort of how this turned into, a little bit of what you're doing now. So you got an MBA, and then of course you graduated. Did you stay? Did you get a job working on still in your F1 OPT, or sort of how did that, How did that look a little bit? And what was that? What did you start doing when you graduated?
One, I'd never graduated, just never did.
Nice.
So
Okay.
I went to the MBA, and in the first 3 months, I realized I was just creating more issues for the professors there than I was learning anything. Because what I've learned is if you run a business, you can read business books and you can sit through case studies, right? Uh, but that just doesn't teach you anything. It just does not. Your own company and the way its its trajectory is going to go is going to be totally different what Steve Jobs did or what mistakes IBM made. So I spent a quarter there, and then a good friend of mine who I was working with at Bear had started a company in St. Louis. Uh, and for those 3 months, he just kept on bugging me and saying, "Dude, just come work with me. I'd rather have you manage operations uh, than you do this MBA." And the program was great. I met amazing people, very, very intelligent, motivated people there. And some of those people are my best friends at this point. But it wasn't something that I felt there was a value in. If I had to spend $100,000, I'd rather spend on building a business and learning more than going out and doing an MBA. And it's
Mhm.
nothing against people who've done an MBA. I think it's great if you do an MBA, but it's just something that I just wasn't too excited about. And I
Yeah.
was lucky enough uh, to then have this person who offered me the job, and because I had the H-1B, I was already counted towards the cap once my H-1B got transferred, and I could actually start working. So again, luck played a huge part, uh, right? But that's something that I just didn't want to do. But so I got out of it.
That's awesome, and a really interesting point because you did have the H-1B from previously after you finished your first
Right,
graduate degree, right?
right.
So okay, so you started working with your friend. How did what you were doing lead into you starting your first company, which is Connexio? Like, can you talk a little bit about how that idea came out?
Yeah. So Agio, which is my friend's company, that's essentially what we were doing, and we were building the company, and it did uh, analytics on ag companies, and animal health companies. And I was heading the animal health side of the business with a lot of analytics there. And then in the whole process, we got our green cards, and that gave me a pathway to actually get rid of my H-1B and try something on my own, which I had wanted to do since I started running medical studios in India. Uh, and I should say that Agio and my friend at Agio, he was absolutely supportive, and I started moonlighting at that point. This was uh, 2018, mid 2018 is essentially when I started moonlighting, just to basically see what I can do with Connexio, and that's essentially when I started Connexio. The idea was to find a better system or to build a better system for students, uh, so that they won't have to make decisions like I made. Right? They could actually make more informed decisions about what they wanted to do, how it's gonna look like, how much it's gonna cost, and people who would share their experiences who've actually gone through the whole thing. Uh, so that went well. I early on, right off the bat, I think I got 2 or 3 universities signed up in Missouri who wanted to use our app, and then I made my trip to India to basically recruit people, or not recruit people, but essentially students who were studying for their bachelor's degree. So I think that is what I was trying to create, a marketplace where you could actually find a good fit and figure out, if you wanted to go to that school, and the school could figure out if they wanted to have you over. Uh, but I think on the ground level, the realities are different. You cannot just go out and you know just destroy the infrastructure that's already been built over the years. There are already recruiters that the universities have you know on the road, they are essentially making those same trips. They're registering people. They've got more money, and they're doing this over 12 months. So very quickly, I realized that model that we were going after is not going to be profitable. Uh, and I did not want to keep on that model because we were a very small team, and we didn't want to be stretched out in different countries where half of my team was here and then the other half was trying to basically recruit people in India. Uh, so that's where we basically made the shift and started WayLit, my co-founder and I.
That's awesome. And so the idea, of course, was you were a student and you started one engineering program and you ended up switching and then you started your MBA. Like, these were big life decisions that very quickly you realized that you sort of had to pivot a little bit. So, but you know what? You saw a problem that you had. You didn't see a solution for it. If you had, you would have used it, I suppose, if you knew about it.
Absolutely.
Which is very much to me like the business mindset of, all right, I've got a problem. I don't know what else is out there to solve that problem.
Right.
Let me build it. Let me figure it out.
Absolutely. And that's what I've done, even in high school and college. That's how things have been, let me go out and do this if nobody else is doing it. So I think that was the approach I was trying to take. But on paper, things look great at times, and then when you start operating on that plan, things are weirdly different. So that was the whole motivation.
I want to ask you a question about that, because especially for folks who are watching, I know, or listening, and I think back to myself when I started Laborless, for example. I still had a full-time job. I started doing research at nights and talking to people on the weekends, and it's scary to kind of go off on your own. Like, I needed to feel very comfortable that I had something to do for the next 6 months with the company before I could go and give notice, basically.
Right.
But I'm also, U.S. citizen. I mean, at this point, you were a green card holder. But I guess maybe there were still some, I don't know, was there any hesitation? I mean, did your, girlfriend or fiance at the time, was she like, are you sure you want to do this? You have a stable job, like, how did you gain the confidence to kind of just say, you know what, I'm going to build this thing and try it?
Right. No, I think thankfully my wife, she's been a strong support. I could not have expected anything more from her. If I want to make a decision, she's there to help me out. And thankfully, my co-founder's wife is the same way. So kudos to both Amar and Pune on this one, if they are listening. But my parents were absolutely distraught with me. My mom calls me from India and she's like, every single time somebody offers you more money for a job, you quit and you move on. Why is that? Like, I don't know. I think I've learned enough in this job. I just can't learn more. Right now, this is just rinse and repeat. I don't think I'm going to learn anything more out of this. And I think that's always been the biggest motivator for me. That can I do multiple things? Can I try multiple things? And the only place you can do that is when you're running something on your own, right? Or if you can find a job that lets you do that. So my wife was absolutely behind my decision. My parents weren't, but I still went ahead and did it because we had a green card and I had the support of the legal system that I could actually start. But before we got our green card, I already had the EAD, which meant that I could actually disconnect from my H-1B. Mm-hmm. So I even took the plunge before that. So the green card came in 2019, and I had already started a business in 2018. I was already making trips. We got the interview round at YC while I was doing my rounds at colleges in India. So I was still making all those trips on an EAD, right? So I was that desperate to actually start something on my own, right, and see how successful I can make it.
That's awesome. That's really, really cool. Much respect for that, sort of taking that level of risk, but also believing in the idea and kind of in yourself, really, and your team and your co-founders, that you
Right.
can make it happen.
Right.
So let's talk about the idea then, right? So you had Connexio, you were going back and forth. You started to realize that this is tough. This is a tough thing to do. You're not going to replace the sort of college recruiters that go around the world and try to recruit talented foreign students or international students. So you clearly, but there's an immigration, flavor there, right? I mean, if you're going from another country to the U.S. to study, visa process, there's an F1 visa, there's all sorts of forms you have to fill out. So it was sort of in this realm of sort of immigration. Obviously, you yourself had gone through H-1B multiple times. You went through the F1 process multiple times. I guess at this point, you're already going through the green card process. What sort of sparked this idea of building a company to automate or streamline the immigration process? And specifically, why did you choose to go into the direction of, all right, let me build something for employers, right? Rather than, for example, law firms, right? Which you probably dealt with some lawyer or an immigration consultant or in-house person at a university. So what made you think, all right, let me fix this, or this is a problem for companies?
Right. No, that's a good question. So I've always, as we discussed before, it's about solving your own issues, the issues that you've had personally. And that was the biggest motivator. But when we were doing Connexio and talking to students who we helped bring to come to the United States, there were a bunch of students in Purdue and St. Louis University, and we kept on talking to them, and every single person would just tell us that, hey, thanks a lot for getting us here. That was very helpful. But how do you think we should find our next job? Because that is such a huge challenge for foreign nationals. The system's just stacked against you. You come here, you do your bachelor's or your master's degree, and you get an OPT. The Career Services Department usually is not set out to basically help out international students because the needs are weirdly different, right? Companies would come in and say, no, we don't sponsor students. What can you do? Right? Even if you do sponsor students, the questions are different, right? And your immigration needs are different. So we kept on hearing this echo from students and universities saying, help us find a job. And the initial idea behind Waylid was let's actually bring more smaller companies onto the grid that would be open to hiring foreign nationals. And having gone through this myself as a foreign national and my co-founder, we were on H-1B, and then we hired people on H-1B, and we understood where the inefficacies were in this whole process, right? That you're running after lawyers, you're trying to get information. The process by itself is very frustrating, and there's no human touch, sort of. It's so cold. I talked to multiple people, and this employee that I was talking to, she did not get selected in her H-1B. Her OPT got expired. She had to go back home. Then the company applied for the H-1B again. She got selected. She came back. But she told me, she said that the process is so cold. The immigration process is so cold that every morning I would wake up, look at the ceiling, and cry. And nobody should have to go through that. That's, you come here, you pay money, and I feel very strongly about this because, I've gone through this system, and we are now facing actual people's stories who are stuck, who are making great pay, but they're stuck just because the lottery system doesn't work for them. So the thing was, how do we make this easier? How do we make this easier? We can't do anything about the lottery. You still have to go through that. But there has to be a component where you can pick the phone up and say, hey, I'm distressed. I don't know what's going to happen, or this has happened. What are my next steps? And that is essentially why we founded WayLit, which was everyone is trying to help the attorneys out, which is great. They need case management systems. Or everyone is only answering the questions that the managers or the employers have. But there are these people whose career is on stake. My career was on stake at one point. But nobody answers questions for you because the attorneys are responsible for the employers. And the employers are always sandwiched between the attorney and the employee. So with WayLit, the basic idea is that you call us, you email us, and we are there to answer any questions that you have. If you have to get your legal advice, we'll get you legal advice. Mostly it's logistical, logistics questions about, oh, can I go, can I travel, or can I move out of state or not, right? But that is so helpful. People have come back to us, written an email to us after the lottery. This is the first lottery that we did on scale. And employees were emailing us and saying, I know I did not get selected, but just having a transparent process and being able to talk to somebody in your team was just so alleviating that I feel I'll do this again, just with you guys being there. And that, I think, is a reward for the whole team. And I think that's what we work towards. Like, how can we make this easier for the employees and the employers who don't understand how this process should work?
And yeah, it's taking so the idea is you really are taking a sort of employee first approach, like, because to your point. Absolutely. And it's funny, I was at a conference a few years ago. It was an American Immigration Lawyers Association conference, their first ever Tech and Innovation Summit in Washington, D.C. There's a panel of folks from case management companies, and I remember during the conversation at some point there was discussion about building sort of client portals, right? Like a portal for the employer and right. Of course a portal for the employee. And to your point, it's not right or wrong. And obviously, I mean, I was an immigration lawyer. I right. Used the case management, my right. company supports immigration lawyers too, but the technology and therefore the workflow and sort of the UI and everything was built foundationally with the Absolutely. Lawyers in mind, because that was the original client. That was the original right. sort of user right. experience. And so it's interesting now that even though, of course, case management companies are building out what they need to from the perspective of the company and the beneficiary, that wasn't sort of how they started. So whereas like WayLit and other companies are sort of looking first at, okay, let's start with the person who's actually moving and like yes. picking up their life. And, or even if they're already in the U.S., they're changing jobs. It's stressful. There's a lot right. of documentation involved. Let's look at them first. It's interesting, though. I kind of understand, just from a cold business standpoint, why it wouldn't start from the beneficiary standpoint, because they're not paying the bills for the H-1B. They can't actually. They're not allowed.
Yeah, they can't. Yeah.
But I always was interested in the idea of like, why isn't the company first and foremost, like the main stakeholder in mind? Because the right. lawyers they get paid by the company. So like the paying entity here, like the actual end client is the company that's paying the law firm. Then the law yes. firm takes that money and they pay their right. monthly fee for the right. case management. So, I mean, it's just funny how like I was always like, but okay, fine, they're not using it, but you should bring them in. Like they should be involved because they're paying right. the bills.
Right. Right. And I think what's also changed, Roman, in the last couple of years is because the tech industry is just, gone supersonic in the last few years, right? The tech talent has become so hard to get. You talk to any tech company in any part of the United States, or for that matter, any part of the world, getting developers is hard, right? Now what's happened is we've started to now, HBR, right, Deloitte and other large organizations have come in and said, well, everyone's looking at the customer experience, but why aren't you looking at the employee experience? Because if you get a developer and you're paying that person $200,000 a year, right, you want to make sure that that developer is happy and is just, focused on the work that they should be doing. And that employee experience is, I think, now pushing the immigration tech industry, where the employers are coming in and saying, we don't want to deal with this, but we want our employee to know what's going on, right? And that's the conversations that we have with our clients or prospects as well, where they're coming in from a position saying, one, we don't understand the process. Number two, we don't want to understand the process because this is an extra part of the job that we already do. And number three, our employees are miserable, right? Because they don't know about anything. They come and ask us questions, and we don't know anything. So we basically just go Google those answers. So what's happened in the last few years, at least that's how I see it, and maybe I'm too biased, is immigration has become less transactional, going from just point A to point B, where attorney would step in, file the case, get an approval, and move on, move out of the picture. What's happened now is you see more mobility managers jobs opening, because this is one tool that the companies are now using to get the best talent. And we've come across employees where they were too stressed out during the interview process because they had to file a transfer H-1B, right? How do you make sure that they are not stressed out through the process? So that, I think, that whole picture is now changing, and the industry is looking at that and saying, okay, yeah, we gotta give a little more transparency into the systems.
So let's talk. I want to talk a little bit about WayLit, because I want to kind of understand and go through sort of how the company works.
Right.
Actually, before we do that, just a couple of comments here. Marianne just mentioned where you said the only place you could try multiple things is if you're running something on your own. And you can also try multiple things without much fear of failure, because who's going to yell at you? You don't have no boss.
Absolutely.
So thanks for that. And Tony said her mother told her the same thing.
Yeah. So that's something that we got to do with, Tony.
Yeah, exactly. And Marianne, again, saying employees matter 100%. I mean, turnover is a huge cost as well.
Yeah.
And just the idea of like keeping good employees and keeping employees happy. I mean, who would want to go into work, even if they're not quitting and the company's running? I mean, I wouldn't want to go to work with a sort of a negative energy.
No, not at all. Or feeling miserable. I mean, I don't want to cry in the morning and then go into work. That's just not great, even though my employer is trying their level best to make me comfortable.
Right. Absolutely. So, okay. So let's talk about how WayLit works. Can you walk me through sort of who's the target client, who's the target audience, and what does the platform do? Right.
So our target audience is essentially companies that are growing fast, right? Or have grown very fast in the last few years, but their HR departments haven't grown, in the same proportions. So there are 2 or 3 people managing a 100 people team, and that is where the cracks start to appear, where they've got all this going on. They are still setting up the culture in the company. They're still making sure that the DNA of the company still stays as the founders wanted it to stay. And that is where our sweet spot is, because what we do is we just don't provide a platform. We don't think the platform is the answer, or just a case management system is the answer. We actually jump in and we act as a virtual assistant to the HR manager, right? And we take over the whole support structure from them. So now when they bring on a new employee, all they do is just invite the employee or the candidate to the platform. We do the background check. We'll essentially check their documents. We'll tell them if there are any red flags, and we'll work with our attorneys to actually file the visa for the employee. And all the manager is doing is signing LCAs or documents whenever they have to. Mm-hmm. So doing that, what we've been able to do is take over, about 60, 70, 80% of the work that they were doing before. And the pandemic actually made it worse for them, because they had to go figure out the LCA process and, what labor less is trying to do now. And those sort of things, they've never just had any help with. And that is the thing that we are trying to solve, like, just managing the kitchen when the house is dying, essentially. Mm-hmm. For a lack of better analogy.
Yeah, no, that's a great analogy. And so, okay, so you step in And you mentioned that you work with lawyers. Obviously, I am an immigration lawyer, and people listening to or watching this are many of them are immigration lawyers or professionals. How does that come in? Obviously, we know that you can't provide legal services since you're not a law firm. So is it like similar to other companies in the space that have like contract attorneys, and then they have their own sort of separate relationship with this client, but the client works through you? Like, how does that work, or how does that look?
Right. So we it's exactly how you said. The way we see ourselves, or legally the way we see ourselves, we are just an extension of the HR department from the employer. Right. They have a direct dealing with the attorney. We essentially just manage the groundwork underneath that.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So the attorneys that we work with, we essentially save them time because we're doing a bunch of administrative stuff that they'll have to do otherwise. Right. We make sure that all the documents are in order before they even have to get to the case. So the attorneys that we work with, we've been able to save them, about 50% of their time that they spend on H-1Bs right now. Mm-hmm. Right. So we just took that one niche, which the mobility managers were trying to fill. Right. And we're trying to make it virtual. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So you're coordinating, you're helping, you're working, you're sort of supporting the HR department from the collection of documents or the kind of coordination. What if the company has their own existing lawyer relationship, or do you try to get in with a company that, let's say they're growing quickly and they've hired a whole bunch of engineers or whoever, and they're finally starting to look at foreign national talent. They have no immigration lawyer. And so they would start, I would assume that that's sort of like the cleanest way to go. They don't have an immigration lawyer relationship. They go with you guys, and then they use one of your attorneys. Does that make sense? Is that right?
We go both ways. We realized pretty early on that, with larger players in the market, we just could not actually run the same business model like everybody else, right? So we are attorney agnostic, and we've made it into a system where the attorneys don't really have to do anything. They're using a system like INS Zoom or something else. They can keep on doing that. We'll provide them with the data. We'll provide them with the downloadable data that they can actually just put into their forms, build their forms, and all they got to do is just send an email with the documents to company XYZ@waylid.com, and the task gets updated automatically. So we are trying to become as agnostic as possible. Because if you have a process in place, and if it is a standardized process, which essentially is what immigration is all about, right? Then it's essentially then a plug and play sort of thing.
And so what you're saying is that if immigration lawyers are using an existing platform, case management platform, or what have you, they don't have to use WayLit sort of directly. They could do things outside of it, and then just liaise with you with the, and send you the completed forms or whatever.
Right. So that's essentially what we expect out of them, and that's enough for us to just keep everybody updated. If it's a manager, hiring manager, HR manager, employee, CEO, president, whoever needs to be updated will be updated. All they got to do is just send an email out, and then we'll do the follow-ups, we'll do the reminders, we'll do the alerts, and every other thing that basically just has to be done manually right now.
Got it. That's interesting. Do you find that? Do you find more of employers saying, "Hey, we want to bring our law firm along with us," or do you find that some they're like, "Yeah, we don't really. This sounds great. We don't really care, and we'll go with whatever lawyers you have a relationship with already."
Right. So what we've seen is more companies are, immigration is personal, and they make relationships. The HR managers would make relationships with the attorneys, and we respect that. Again, what we learned from Connexia was you cannot go and destroy an infrastructure that was created multiple years ago, right? Just to say, hey, look at us, we're the new kid on the block. That just won't work. So we are respectful of that. If you want to keep your attorney, that's absolutely fine. We can just come and plug in the gap that existed. what we've seen is a lot of employers wanting to stay with their attorneys.
Yep.
Right? Because they won't trust you. Even if you go and say, oh yeah, we work with attorneys who are great, not always they'll come back and say, yeah, let's try it out. Right. So we just wanted to keep it both ways and say, okay, if you're in absolutely in love with your attorney that you have, that's absolutely fine. As long as the attorney can send us an email, that's all we want.
Interesting. Makes sense. And I mean, I agree with you too. We took the same approach with Laborless. We recognize it's a little bit of a different scenario, but we recognize that in some cases, larger companies with a robust in-house immigration team, they may want to handle, let's say, the LCA process themselves. They've got the infrastructure going.
Right.
They want to, they're not going to outsource it to their law firm. They handle it. And so the software needs to support them. On the other hand, there are smaller companies or sometimes bigger companies that have a different relationship with their law firms, and they offload everything onto the law firm. And so software needs to support that too. So I definitely agree with you. I mean, it makes it a little bit more challenging because in a sense you're troubleshooting clients differently because they're sort of on different parts of the spectrum.
Absolutely.
But what's the point of being a service or a business if you can't serve your clients? I'm here to help you where you need help.
You got to go where your clients' needs are, right? You just can't be totally oblivious to whatever they're trying to say. So that's what we're trying to do. Again, I should caution that we're a year and a half into this whole process, right? There's a huge market that we still need to test. We are just dabbling with a few clients that we've talked to personally or via emails, and this is what we've gotten from them. This whole thing might change, right, in a year's time, where we might just come back and say, nope, it doesn't really work when they bring in their own lawyers. But I don't see why it won't work at this point, right? I totally understand that we need to decrease some work for the lawyers as well, right? But I think we are doing that on the bottom level, right, where they don't have to deal with a lot of documentation.
Do you? Well, let me ask you a sort of a different question. Simple one, but a question came in here about how did you decide on the name WayLit?
Oh man, that was my co-founder hated the name when I came up with it, and I didn't know what it actually meant as a slang, because if you pre 2020, if you were to go type WayLit into Google, it'll actually show you mushrooms and weed, an Instagram post on people being high, which essentially meant WayLit, right? And like, I'm super high. I had no context of that until we had already bought the domain. But the whole crux of it was we're lighting the way. So that is what it was. And you know how hard it is to get domain names, and this domain name was there, and we basically got it, and we were super happy that we got it. At least I was. It grew on my co-founder afterwards, but he usually hates every single thing that I decide on, anyways.
I will say though, it does have the sort of the ring of kind of a Silicon Valley startup company. It's got two short words put together. The sound is so that's interesting. That's so funny. I wouldn't think about that too, but maybe that's a California thing where people are like, oh, I'm feeling way lit or something like that. Because I'll tell you, I haven't heard in New York, but maybe I'm just not cool enough.
I think we're old. That's the problem. I tested this on different people, right? I tested it on my older neighbors. They were absolutely okay with the name. Middle-aged people, my friends, they were okay with it. And then I tested on a few school kids who were doing internships in the building that we were in, and they started laughing. I'm like, why are you laughing? Like, you probably don't know, but this is what this word is used for. Like, that's fine. We'll still use it. It's okay. If cool. Nothing else, I can actually sell the name to a weed company or something.
Right. Exactly. That's actually a great point. That's a great point. That's super funny. That's cool. So I wanted to sort of, I'm curious as to where I think we have an understanding of what WayLit does now and who you're kind of going after. Like you said, you guys have been around for a year and a half, so you've been launched for, I guess, for a year and a half, right? What are you thinking about it? Obviously, a lot of things change as you grow, as you get more clients, as you learn from them. But like, what do you have your sights set on, or with your company, if whatever you can share? And then, of course, generally speaking, like, where do you see the industry moving, in the coming few years?
Right. Our side is firmly set on customer growth. We are absolutely working on a shoestring budget. We haven't raised any money, and we don't want to go out and raise money until we get to a particular customers or number of employees that we are managing. So that's what the whole team is focused on. We are dabbling in other ideas. I don't know if those are going to work or not, but the industry is quickly moving towards looking at global talent, and just they're more okay with people working remote than they were before. So we are trying that market with the existing clients that we have and see if we can actually help them find developers halfway around the world. And what would it take? What would the logistics take? Again, it's just an idea that we're working on. We've been successful in getting a lot of registrations from a lot of people around the world who have the talent, experienced talent. So we're just testing that marketplace right now.
So is the idea for that effectively like a recruiter of sorts, where you actually find the talent and then you can connect them with your existing clients or with other employers, and then of course step in and say, here, we can also help you with the immigration side of it? Or is that what you mean, kind of by connecting talent to companies?
Yeah. So you could think about it as just a marketplace. We don't want to be recruiters because it just is not what we want to do. We just want to connect employees and employers, on a few criteria that the employers have and the employees have, and then just help them connect. And that's the only thing. Again, we just started testing this idea a month ago. We don't know where that's going to go, but our employers or the clients felt that it was a good extension to what we were already doing. In case if they like a person and they want to, sponsor this person's H-1B in the future, then we could actually take care of that as well. So that's just that's just in a totally different tangent though, and we'll see how the market fares. But I see that at least on the employment side, that is where the market is going. So what's going to happen over the years is we'll see a lot of companies now wanting to bring people over, even smaller companies wanting to bring people over as they're raising money. Right? They're going away from contractual jobs. They are more okay with people living wherever they are and, coming over every now and then just to meet the company. In terms of immigration, as I said before, I think employee experience is going to be king. Silicon Valley has already paved the path for that, and then employers are demanding that at this point. Mm-hmm. So I've talked to a few attorneys, and again, my sample size is not global. I might just be wrong. We're just 1.5 years into making, but they are getting pressurized at this point from the employers saying, we want a little more clarity on where are these 50 people moving, right, during the whole year. And it's not going to be just A to B case management. It has to be more than that. People moving out of state because of the pandemic, or what LaborLess is doing, making LCAs more convenient for employers, so that employers are no longer going into the offices anymore. So how do you manage LCAs at that point, right? So all those things are changing, and the world's changed in the last 1 year. It's drastically changed, and immigration is going to catch up to that. But I think that's what's going to happen eventually. That employee experience is going to reign.
Yeah, definitely. I'm 100% in agreement with that, and I think that the fact that companies are allowing employees to work remotely, to work from anywhere, and companies, I think I just read, so one company called Localize, they just raised $12 million to help hire people internationally.
Right.
There's another company, I think it's called Remote, if I remember correctly. They just raised $50 million, like something crazy.
Right.
So there's clearly a demand for having a global workforce.
Right.
And that's driven by, of course, the pandemic and what has
Right.
happened in terms of people working remotely, but it's staying because employees are like, I like this. And smart companies are going to start attracting good talent that way. And more lagging companies are going to have to quickly compete, right? And get people to stay under the same terms. So yeah, I definitely agree with you. Things are going more global, and employee experience is driving a lot of that. And it's going to drive a lot of purchasing decisions in terms of services and products. And so we're in the right place at the right time, I suppose.
Yeah, well, we'll see in a year. So
so I'm curious to know, like, what bumps in the road have you? I know it hasn't been super long, right? But surely, and of course, it was challenging for you to even get here, right? I mean, this whole journey back and forth. You came here, you went back to India. I mean, that's a challenge in and of itself. And of course, you're solving some of that for others through WayLit. But I'm curious, kind of as a business founder, now that you finally did the thing that you've been thinking about for a while, and you started your own company, you're building and growing your own company. I'm curious, kind of, what are some of the challenges that you've faced, and maybe what have you learned from them? Maybe if one sticks out for you in particular, because as you know, people learn from others' mistakes.
Yes.
And so I think, hearing the ups is, of course, inspiring. Hearing the downs is perhaps more even helpful in a way.
Right. The challenges I think every founder faces that challenge. It's just a very lonely road when you take it, because you dream up something which does not exist or hasn't existed, and maybe there's a reason that it never existed, and now you're going after that dream to make sure that dream basically becomes a reality. And it's hard. It is hard how many times you have to take rejections, how many times people would say no, and then it's hard. I have much more respect for founders, especially my father and my younger brother, who've been able to successfully create businesses, because it's very lonely, because nobody else understands what you're going through, right? Because nobody else has the same pathway that you've taken. Your co-founder does understand that, and that's the best thing you can do for yourself. Just have a co-founder. That's the first thing that I've learned, is that entrepreneurship is great, but it's actually good to be married to a co-founder. Well, not literally married, but metaphorically speaking, to a co-founder that shares the same ethics as you do. So I've been super, super lucky that I have somebody that I can actually call and say, "Hey, Satya, I'm just stressed out," and he would just listen to me and figure out a way to basically de-stress me. And I think that's very important. That's been the biggest challenge, right? And the pandemic actually just made it worse, because you're no longer going into an office. You're no longer talking to the founders that you were meeting in the co-working space anymore. You can't throw ideas at people because you're just not seeing them over a cup of coffee. So you're just stuck in a room, just trying to overtake the world at this point, right? And failing at it, and then trying it again the next day. So yeah, I think that's been the biggest thing. I'm okay with taking risks, and so is my co-founder, and our wives are fine with those sort of things. But there's a challenge, right? That you're growing old, you're getting close to 40, and you need this to work. And if it doesn't work, right, what do you have to show for all the years that you put into that? And I don't think, as a founder who's 21-year-old would think about that. I would not really think about that. But when you're getting close to 40, right, passing 35, that becomes a reality that you need to think about, because you've got other liabilities that you need to take care of.
Yeah, definitely.
So I don't know if that answered your question or not, but
absolutely. I mean, the loneliness is real. The loneliness is very real, and I know that there are circles of founders. I mean, there are founder support networks.
Right.
But to your point, and they're great. I mean, talking to people who are starting businesses is great. But first of all, there are less founders out there than there are employees of other companies. So it's harder to find.
Right.
And to your point, not even though the founders are going through some of the similar things that you're going through, nobody went through exactly what you're going through. It's not like a class of interns at JP Morgan all went through the same training and they can complain or they can whatever. You can't. It's everyone's path is different.
Yep. Your challenges are your own. And it does not matter which book you read and what they're telling you in that book, right? If that company raised $5 million doing the same thing, it's almost impossible that you'd go and do the same thing, unless you're, Uber and Lyft, which were just running for the same sort of people at the same time. But that doesn't happen in real life for most of us, right? We just have to go figure it out ourselves and make those mistakes for ourselves. Right. And then whatever story we are telling people, it's not going to be their story. And that's the fun about having a startup.
To me, what you just said is kind of the impetus of starting this show and these conversations, because yes, maybe there's no Uber and Lyft, but if somebody who right now has an idea for building some tech and immigration or global mobility more generally, and they hear you and they hear other people in the industry, maybe that'll give them a little more comfort, kind of like Lyft, and because now you're not a crazy person. Now there's someone doing something kind of in the same universe. So here's someone else who's trying it.
Absolutely. Network is great, and I'm thankful that you're doing this. You're taking the lead on this and putting people in touch. And this is a great way for people to come together and say, well, this is the industry where the industry is going, and this is what we're trying to do, and we're finding it challenging. How did you solve it for yourself?
So we have a great question here from Marco. Asks, what's one thing you would have done differently? It's this question of like knowing, if you knew then what you knew now, what would you have done differently?
Good question. We talked to a bunch of people. We never started building the software until 6-8 months into this whole thing. What I would have done differently is picked a larger market to go after. And Roman, if you remember the last time we were talking, it's essentially 60,000 employers that you're going after, right? And there are a lot of lawyers in this whole process. There's a lot of other companies that are trying to do the same thing. So if your sample size is larger, even with a small market share, you could be a very successful company.
Yep.
And here the problem is that the sample size is small, right? When you only think about U.S. immigration. So if I were to think about it again, I'd actually think about a larger sample size or client base to go after. But that's, also comes because of your personal experiences. I don't have personal experiences, doing anything else, right? Or being a divorce lawyer or going through that myself, right? I can't actually build a solution around that. So I'm just building a solution around the problems that I had.
The nice thing about it, though, is that while maybe we're tackling U.S. immigration, there's a whole world out there with their own immigration rules and processes. And so when you zoom out and forget about U.S. or even North America, but you start looking at the entire world, now we're talking a much bigger sample size with a lot of different players. So I actually think that even though it depends on how you look at it, it depends on the perspective you take on what you're doing. I mean, even think about, like, let's say electric vehicles right now feels like a huge market size, but then you look at, let's just say someone like, I don't know, let's say Elon Musk, his real market is energy consumption or energy creation, right? Which is way bigger than just cars, right?
Absolutely.
Or maybe all of transportation. We're talking cars, we're talking pickup trucks, we're talking underground train systems. And so I feel like you start small. And when you have that realization that you have, or that you're mentioning of like, man, I wish this market was a little bit bigger. Great. Do the thing that you're doing really well, and then start saying, well, how can it actually benefit the broader world?
Right. No, absolutely. I totally agree. Totally agree with that. The other implication with what we are talking about is, if you don't have the vision of the larger world, right, you can't raise money because if you're working for saying, oh yeah, we want to basically make the product perfect for US, and then we'll go after the world. Too late, right? You're not selling that dream. So when you start, you need to start selling the bigger dream and try and do the smaller thing. But what we did was we started doing the smaller thing and then started realizing that we could make this bigger, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that is just the flip side, and I think it's just about storytelling, right? How you tell that story to the investors. And not a good storyteller, so I'm not there yet.
It's interesting. I hear you, but I kind of want to disagree, or I don't want to disagree, but I feel like if your story, because yes, investors, they want to hear the global domination, $100 billion valuation. Right. But if we forget about investors for a moment and we just think about on a daily basis what you do as a founder and how devoted you are to your clients doing the small thing, I actually almost feel like it's okay to sell the small vision because you can tackle it and you're focused on it and you're passionate about it. And I think to your point, okay, you get to the small thing and then at that point it feels too late. I don't know. I don't necessarily think it has to be. I think different companies do things at their own time. And I think if you dominate a small, I mean, I'm biased. This is what I'm doing, right? I'm dominating a very small subset of forget about global immigration. I'm trying to do and dominate a piece of the U.S. immigration pie. But I'm very aware of the fact that can lead to way bigger things. My story, however, for now is I don't care about everything else. I care about this small piece of the pie. So I wanted to kind of push back on that because I think both ways work. I think it just depends on what kind of a person you are, and to your point, what story you're sort of.
Yeah, the story that you spin is essentially what makes the difference there.
Yeah. So, but this is why these conversations are amazing because it's
absolutely, yeah.
Both points of view are super interesting. So I love to kind of end these on maybe kind of more of a fun or an interesting question. I love the story. I mean, the story of Waylid and how you guys came up with the name is hilarious. Did you have any other like funny or ridiculous names that you came out with, or were you just kind of you had the one and you said let's go with it?
Oh no, we had a bunch. So I'm a huge fan of Lord of the Rings, of J.R.R. Tolkien, and one of the books that he had written, and Satya's gonna kill me because I'm mentioning this. One of the books that he's written for children is called Girabbit, Girabbit. It's a mix of a giraffe and a rabbit. I still have the book in my collection. I'm like, that's a cool name. Everyone would remember that. Let's just go get girabbit.com. And so I did. And Satya was mad. My co-founder Satya, he was mad at the point that he's like, I'm not working for a company called Girabbit, dude. I'm not doing this. Like, okay. Wow. So there were other names as well, and it's with buying a domain is like you have $1 million in your pocket, and you can now go to a shopping mall and pick anything you want, right? As long as it fits you. Mm-hmm. So and then there's the fear of losing out. So the first domain that you see and it makes a little bit of sense, you essentially want to buy it before somebody else buys it out from you. So yeah, there's a bunch of domains that we actually had. It just did not work out. Waylid would not have worked out either. He hated it to start with. And then somebody told him that it was okay. And the next morning he's like, yep, I talked to a few people. They said it was a good name, so I'm okay with it now.
That's awesome. That's so funny. Also, if you ever start a side business, consulting on J.R.R. Tolkien, anything, you got your business name, Girabbit.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, that's true. That's what I'm going to go after this.
Right. After the Waylid exit, we're going to go into J.R.R. Tolkien consulting.
Just make Girabbit rule the world.
Oh, man, I love it. Well, Raj, thank you. This was awesome. So fun talking to you and learning about everything you've been working on and sort of your journey so far. And, good luck, best of luck on the journey. You guys are in the beginning, but there's so much ahead that I'm excited to see. And hopefully we'll have you back on when, in a year, and let's see where things go, especially in comparison to what we've talked about today.
Yeah, no, thanks so much for having me. This was a sheer pleasure. I learned a lot. I love talking to you. I mean, last time was great. This time was absolutely amazing. I hope I was able to put some value into this conversation, just sharing my story. But happy to connect with people whoever's listening, and talk more about what the future looks like. So yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. You guys can go and find me if you want to. But thank you so much for giving me the opportunity. Appreciate it, Jerome.
Absolutely. Likewise. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Raj. So cool. Thank you everybody for joining and listening. As always, I love listening to stories of starting a company and at the ground floor, and this idea of like, well, we're figured out this thing, but we have so many other avenues to take, and we're going to continue to explore. I definitely feel this way with Laborless. There's still so much more left to do. And I'm sure Raj feels the same way about WayLit. So it's really fun to have these conversations and really compare them to conversations with folks who have built companies and have run them for many, many years, and the lessons are different. And so hopefully this was interesting to you and helpful. As always, thank you everybody for your comments and for your questions. It's super fun talking to you live effectively. I wish one day we can do one of these things on stage live in front of an audience and interview people. We'll get there. We'll get there one of these days. In the meantime, peace out, everybody. Have a great weekend. Stay safe and take care of yourselves. Have fun.